She arrived at the municipal hospital wearing torn clothes, asking for nothing more than a chance to pray for the sick in exchange for a simple meal. The doctors laughed. The nurses mocked her, until they witnessed something that science could not explain. But before we continue, let me ask you a sincere question. Are you ready to answer Mary's call for your life? If your answer is yes, write in the comments, "I'm ready." And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because here we share stories where faith, mystery, and miracles meet. It was a typical Monday morning at the municipal hospital. Phones rang endlessly. Nurses hurried through the corridors. Doctors moved from one emergency to another. In the middle of that familiar chaos, a woman quietly approached the reception desk. Her name was Grace Harper. She was 60 years old, though life had carved such deep lines into her face that she looked closer to 80. Her clothes were worn and torn. Her sandals were dusty. Her gray hair was tangled and unkempt. But her eyes were different. They carried a strange brightness, a peaceful light that seemed to contradict her fragile appearance. "Excuse me," she said softly to the receptionist. Linda barely looked up from her computer as she typed rapidly. "Appointment requests are only handled in the afternoon," Linda replied impatiently. "If it's an emergency, the entrance is in the building next door." "I didn't come for an appointment," Grace said gently. That made Linda stop typing. "I came to offer prayers for the sick. In exchange, if possible, for a meal. I haven't eaten since yesterday." At that moment, Dr. Andrew Collins, head of the emergency department, happened to be passing by with a stack of patient charts. He slowed down, having overheard the conversation. "You're offering prayers in exchange for food?" he asked with raised eyebrows. "Yes, doctor," Grace answered calmly. "Our Lady gave me this gift. I can help those who are suffering." Linda burst out laughing. "Listen, lady," she said sarcastically. "This isn't a restaurant or a church. It's a hospital. We deal with medicine, surgeries, real treatments." Grace didn't react to the mockery. "I didn't come to compete with medicine," she said quietly. "I came to complement it." Dr. Andrews studied her carefully. In 20 years working in emergency medicine, he had seen every kind of person imaginable. But something about this woman's calm confidence made him pause. "What kind of gift do you think you have?" he asked. Grace slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out a worn rosary and a small image of the Virgin Mary. "Since I was a child," she explained, "whenever I pray with true faith, impossible things happen." "Impossible?" Dr. Andrew repeated. "Yes. People who were given no hope begin to recover." Linda exchanged a glance with the doctor and discreetly twirled her finger beside her temple, silently suggesting the woman was crazy. "But doctor," Andrew was curious. "All right," he said after a moment. "Let's run a test." Grace nodded calmly. "We have a patient in room 315, the doctor continued. "Her name is Maggie. She's 45 years old and diabetic. She came in yesterday with a foot wound that hasn't healed in 6 months. It developed gangrene." Grace felt her chest tighten. "She's scheduled for amputation tomorrow morning." The hallway suddenly felt heavier. "May I see her?" Grace asked quietly. "You can," Dr. Andrew replied. "But understand something. That wound has already been evaluated by 4 specialists. There is no saving it. If you manage to heal it with prayer, I'll personally pay for your meals for an entire month." They took the elevator to the 3rd floor. Room 315. Inside, Maggie lay silently in the hospital bed, her face pale with exhaustion. Her daughter Emily sat beside her, holding her hand while trying not to cry. "Mom, you have to stay strong," Emily whispered. "After the surgery, you'll learn to walk again." Maggie closed her eyes. "I'll be crippled at 45, she murmured. "How will I work? How will I take care of you?" Dr. Andrew knocked softly before entering. "Mrs. Maggie, I brought someone who would like to meet you." Maggie looked toward the door, confused. Grace stepped inside. "Who are you?" Maggie asked. "My name is Grace," she said kindly. "I came to pray for you, if you allow me." Emily immediately stood up. "Pray? Doctor, my mom needs medical treatment, not prayers." But Maggie raised her hand gently. "Let her stay," she said. "At this point, any help is welcome." Grace walked slowly toward the bed. "May I see the wound?" Dr. Andrew hesitated. The wound was heavily bandaged, but even through the layers, the smell in the room was strong. "Mrs. Grace," he warned, "it's not a pleasant sight." Grace simply nodded. "Doctor, I have seen a lot of suffering in this world." He carefully removed the bandage. The wound was terrible. Dark patches of dead tissue covered parts of Maggie's foot. Pus had gathered along the edges. The infection had clearly spread. Emily couldn't bear the sight and quickly left the room. Grace didn't flinch. Instead, she slowly knelt beside the bed. She placed her hands gently above the wound, without touching it. "Maggie," she asked softly, "do you believe in miracles?" Maggie looked away. "I used to. Now, I'm not sure." Grace smiled gently. "Our Lady never gives up on us. Would you pray with me?" Grace began whispering a prayer. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, in the hour of our anguish." Something strange began to happen. The foul odor that had filled the room began to fade. Slowly, gradually, until it was replaced by a faint fragrance, like fresh flowers. Dr. Andrew frowned. Had someone sprayed perfume, or was he imagining it? Grace continued praying for nearly 20 minutes. At first, Maggie remained silent, but little by little, she began whispering the prayer along with Grace. When the prayer ended, Grace slowly stood up. "God has heard our prayer," she said peacefully. Dr. Andrew crossed his arms. "How can you possibly be so sure?" Grace held the rosary in her hands. "Because I can feel when Our Lady is working." The doctor examined the wound again. Something did look slightly different, maybe less inflamed, but that could have been his imagination. "Doctor," Grace said gently, "may I ask you one favor?" "What is it?" "Please examine Maggie's wound tomorrow morning before the surgery. If there's no improvement," Dr. Andrew said firmly, "we proceed with the amputation as planned." Grace looked at him calmly. "Doctor, if Our Lady wills it, there will be improvement." Dr. Andrew sighed. "With all due respect, Mrs. Grace, this wound will not improve in 12 hours. Grace only smiled gently. "If Our Lady desires it, it will." The next morning, Dr. Andrew arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. He had barely slept. All night long he had thought about the strange woman, her quiet confidence, and the way the room had filled with the scent of flowers during her prayer. He told himself it had probably been his imagination. Still, curiosity pushed him to check Maggie before the scheduled surgery. He walked down the corridor and stopped in front of room 315. When he entered, Maggie was already awake. But something was different. She was smiling. "Doctor," she said excitedly, "you're not going to believe this." Dr. Andrew frowned. "What is it, Mrs. Maggie?" "The pain," she said. "It's gone. All night long. I didn't feel anything." The doctor stepped closer. "Let's take a look." He carefully removed the bandage. And for a moment, he felt the room spin. The wound that had been black, infected, and dying the day before was now completely different. Healthy pink tissue had replaced the dark necrotic areas. The gangrene had vanished. Dr. Andrew stepped back, stunned. This is impossible," he whispered. He immediately called for another opinion. Within minutes, Dr. Sandra Mendez, the surgeon scheduled to perform the amputation, arrived. She examined the wound once, then again, then a third time. Finally, she looked at Andrew. "Andrew, this makes absolutely no medical sense." She pointed carefully. "The infection is gone. And look here. New tissue is forming. That doesn't happen overnight." Maggie looked at both of them with shining eyes. "That lady was right," she said quietly. "It was a miracle." Dr. Andrew grabbed Maggie's medical chart and opened the photographs taken the previous day. The images clearly showed the terrible wound from before. And yet the foot in front of him now looked completely different. The same patient, the same wound, but miraculously healed. "Where is the woman who prayed with you?" he asked suddenly. Maggie shrugged. "I don't know, doctor." She left after the prayer. Dr. Andrew rushed out of the room and ran down the hallway toward reception. Linda was sitting behind her desk as usual. "Linda," he said breathlessly. "That woman from yesterday, the one who prayed. Where is she?" Linda looked confused. "What woman?" "Grace. The one who asked for food in exchange for prayers." Linda stared at him. "Doctor, what are you talking about?" "You laughed at her yesterday," Andrew insisted. "You called her crazy." Linda shook her head slowly. "Doctor, I think you're mistaken. I've worked here for 10 years. I would remember something like that." Dr. Andrew felt a chill run through his body. "What do you mean you don't remember?" He began asking everyone nearby. Nurses, orderlies, security staff. No one had seen Grace. No one remembered her. It was as if she had never existed. Shaken, he returned to room 315. Maggie was still lying peacefully in her bed. her wound continuing to improve before his eyes. "Mrs. Maggie," he said carefully, "describe the woman who prayed with you." Maggie thought for a moment. She had gray hair, simple clothes, maybe around 60. She held a rosary and a small image of the Virgin Mary. "Anything else?" Andrew asked. Maggie closed her eyes, remembering. Yes. She had the kindest eyes I have ever seen. And while she was praying, Maggie hesitated. "I swear I saw a golden light surrounding her." 3 days later, Dr. Andrew was still deeply disturbed by Maggie's case. He was reviewing the medical reports when his assistant suddenly burst into his office. "Doctor, there's a strange situation in room 220. Andrew stood up immediately. "What situation?" "The boy, Ethan, the one who arrived in the ICU yesterday with severe pneumonia." "What about him?" "His parents say a woman appeared in the room during the night and prayed with them. And this morning, the boy is breathing normally." Dr. Andrew felt his heart begin to pound. "A what woman?" "No one knows," the assistant replied. "Security didn't see anyone enter the ICU. But the boy came off the ventilator, and he's asking for food." They rushed to room 220. Inside, 8-year-old Ethan sat upright in his hospital bed, happily playing with a toy car. Just 12 hours earlier, doctors had believed he would not survive the night. "How are you feeling, champ?" Dr. Andrew asked. "Good," Ethan replied cheerfully. "The pretty lady said I was going to get better." Andrew froze. "What lady?" "The one who came to visit me at night. She wore grandma clothes, and she prayed with me." Ethan's mother, Sarah, stepped forward nervously. "Doctor, I stayed here all night." No one entered the room. But around 3 in the morning, Ethan suddenly started breathing better. Dr. Andrew examined the boy. His lungs, which had been severely compromised, were now clear. Completely normal. "This can't be happening," the doctor whispered. But the strange events were only beginning. The following night, Dr. Andrew decided to stay at the hospital. He sat in the security room, watching the surveillance cameras with 2 guards. At 2:47 a.m., something appeared on the monitors. A woman was walking slowly through the hospital corridor. But something about her image was strange. She looked almost translucent, surrounded by a faint, soft light. She moved quietly from room to room, staying inside for a few minutes, then leaving. "Do you see that?" Andrew asked the guards urgently. "See what, doctor?" one of them replied. "The corridor looks empty." Dr. Andrew stared at the screen. The guards saw nothing. But on the monitor, the mysterious woman continued walking. She stopped in front of room 505. Inside that room lay Mr. Henry, a patient suffering from severe liver cirrhosis. The woman slowly entered, and the door closed behind her. Dr. Andrew didn't hesitate. He left the security room and hurried down the silent hospital corridor toward room 505. His heart was racing. When he reached the door and pushed it open, he stopped in disbelief. There she was, Grace. She was kneeling beside Mr. Henry's bed, quietly praying. This time she was not a figure on a screen or a distant memory. She was real, solid. Yet something about her presence seemed almost otherworldly. A soft light seemed to surround her, as if it were shining from within. "Grace," Dr. Andrew whispered softly, careful not to wake the patient. She turned toward him and smiled. "Hello, Dr. Andrew," she said gently. "I knew you would find us again." Andrew stepped closer, struggling to understand what he was seeing. "Who are you really?" Grace lowered her gaze briefly to the rosary in her hands. "I am only a servant of Our Lady," she said softly. "She sends me where help is needed most." "But you disappeared," Andrew insisted. "No one remembers you." Grace nodded. "That is because I am not meant to be remembered. What should remain in people's hearts are the miracles." Then she returned to her prayer. Dr. Andrew watched in silence. Something extraordinary began to happen. Mr. Henry's skin, which had been deeply yellow from advanced jaundice, slowly began to regain a healthier tone. Little by little, the color changed. The tension in his face relaxed. His breathing grew steady. Andrew stared in disbelief. "How is this possible?" he murmured. Grace continued praying. "Faith, doctor," she said quietly. "When we pray with true faith, Our Lady carries our prayers to her Son." A few minutes later, Grace finished. Mr. Henry was sleeping peacefully, and the terrible yellow tone that had covered his skin was almost completely gone. Grace slowly stood up. She walked toward the window. "Grace, wait," Andrew said urgently. "Don't leave." She turned toward him again. My work here is finished, doctor. But there are still so many people who need help, he said. Grace smiled with a kindness that seemed endless. Now it is your turn. Andrew looked confused. My turn. You have learned something important, she said gently. Medicine is not only science. It is also love, faith, and hope. Andrew felt the weight of her words. But how can I continue what you do? He asked. Grace stepped closer. Pray for your patients. Treat each one as if they were your own family. And remember that Our Lady is always present wherever there is genuine love. The window behind her suddenly opened by itself. A warm golden light filled the room. Grace, Andrew said desperately, how can I prove that you existed? Grace removed a small chain from around her neck. At the end of it hung a tiny medal of the Virgin Mary. She placed it gently into his hand. The greatest miracles, doctor, she said softly, are not the healings of the body. They are the transformations of the heart. The golden light grew brighter, and in the next moment, Grace was gone. Dr. Andrew stood alone in the room, holding the medal tightly in his hand. He turned toward the bed. Mr. Henry slept peacefully, and the signs of jaundice had completely disappeared. 6 months later, the municipal hospital had become known throughout the region for its remarkable recoveries. Cases that once seemed hopeless were now ending in unexpected healing. Dr. Andrew never told the press about Grace, but he quietly began making changes. He built a small chapel inside the hospital. He organized prayer groups with volunteer staff, and he trained his medical team to treat every patient with greater compassion, patience, and spiritual care. The results surprised everyone. Recovery rates improved by nearly 40%. Complaints dropped dramatically. Soon the hospital became an example for others to follow. Dr. Andrew always wore the small medal of Our Lady beneath his coat. Every night before leaving the hospital, he would stop by the rooms of the most critical patients, not with medical equipment, but with a moment of silent prayer, because he had learned something that medicine alone could not teach. Miracles never stop happening. They are simply waiting for hearts that are willing to believe, for hearts that understand that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when we ask with faith, humility, and love for others. And whenever someone asked him about the unexplained recoveries, Dr. Andrew would smile and say, sometimes God sends angels disguised as ordinary people who ask for nothing more than a meal. And in return, they bring a piece of heaven to earth. The medal around his neck would catch the light softly, as if quietly confirming his words. And perhaps this story has reached you for a reason, because miracles are not only extraordinary events. They are reminders from heaven that God has not forgotten us, and that the Virgin Mary still walks silently through the darkest corridors of our pain. If you believe that Our Lady still performs miracles today, write in the comments, Mary, go ahead of me, and subscribe to the channel to continue discovering powerful stories of faith and hope. Because wherever Mary arrives, the impossible becomes possible.